We humans have a lot of trouble thinking clearly. Now, you might think that you're able to see things right when the pressure is on, but as today's author points out in his best-selling new book, if you're like most people, you're probably not thinking at all. Hello, internet friends. Welcome back to the channel. And in this video, we're going to continue our book club series where I talk about the key ideas and share my thoughts on self-help, business, and productivity books that I've read recently. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at Clear Thinking by Shane Parrish. Now, Shane is the creator of Farnham Street and co-author of some of my favorite books in the Great Mental Models series, which was published in conjunction with Automatic, the company behind WordPress. But this book is all Shane, and spoiler alert, it's really good. Now, the layout of this book is a little different than a lot of the books in the self-help or personal development genre, as it has both a preface and an introduction, 5 distinct parts, and then a conclusion. Now, the preface is pretty short, but it does contain a little bit of Shane's personal story and a couple of things that are worth noting. One of which is that to get better results, we need 2 things. First, we need to create the space to reason in our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And second, to deliberately use that space to think clearly. Now, obviously, that is much easier said than done, which is basically what the rest of the book is all about. But it clearly sets the stage going forward. Now, second, I really like Shane's tagline that he shares here, which is mastering the best of what other people have already figured out. I kind of want to steal that for myself, as it's really at the heart of why I read so many books. The next section is the introduction, and this is where we start to get into the importance of being able to think clearly and make good decisions. There's a quote in this section that I really like where Shane says that what happens in ordinary moments is what really determines our future. Now, we often don't think about these ordinary moments of our lives as being moments of decision, but I believe they're really important, and our future is actually determined by our daily routines, the decisions that we make every single day. So if we understand that every moment matters, we can put ourselves in a better position to make easier decisions. The positioning here is important, as Shane mentions in this introduction, that time is the friend of someone who is properly positioned and the enemy of someone who is poorly positioned. So the better we can position ourselves, the better our decisions will end up being. Now, the first official part of this book is part 1, which is the enemies of clear thinking. The chapters are numbered a little bit weird as they use points. So for example, the first chapter is 1.1, the second is 1.2, and so on. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this chapter numbering, but it's really not that big a deal. Chapter 1.1 is what contains the big idea, which is that in the space between impulse and response, one of 2 things can happen. You can consciously pause and apply reason to your situation, or you can cede control and execute a default behavior. Now, the following chapters in this section each cover one of the brain's 4 default behaviors. The emotional default, which is where our emotions take over and they cloud our judgment. The ego default, which is where our desire to feel or appear right overrides the desire to actually be right. The social default, which is where we tend to want to go along with the crowd. And the inertia default, which is where we tend to try and keep things exactly the way that they are. Now, the last chapter in this section is called Default to Clarity, and it talks about how the way to improve your defaults is by creating an intentional environment where your desired behavior becomes the default behavior. And I like this a lot. It reminds me a lot of The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul, another phenomenal book. Now, the second part is called Building Strength, and this is where Shane starts to talk about the strategies that we can use to combat the defaults described in that first section. The chapters in this section describe different tactics like self-accountability, self-knowledge, and self-control, but the one that really resonated with me is self-confidence. He mentions on page 63 that more dreams die from a lack of confidence than a lack of competence, which not only sounds good, but also very much describes the place that I find myself in my own creator journey. He says that self-confidence is trusting in your abilities and your value to others. And it's a good reminder to not only myself, but really all creators that what you are doing really does matter. It's easy to lose sight of that sometimes, so I appreciated this section a lot. I also really liked the last chapter, which talked about exemplars, which are basically role models that you look up to. Who you surround yourself with is very important, but so are the people that you look up to. And one of my action items from this book was to identify my own exemplars for a personal board of directors, which was very enlightening when I went through it. So for example, I picked John Maxwell for my completely made up director of leadership position, Jim Rohn as my director of personal growth, Dale Carnegie as my director of communications, etc. Now, it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but I really enjoyed this exercise, and I found it helpful to identify what role I want certain people to play in my life. The third part in this book is on managing weaknesses, and in this part, Shane focuses on knowing your weaknesses and sharing strategies to mitigate or avoid them. There's some really good stuff in this section, including the reasons why we have trouble seeing our own weaknesses, and a quote that I love which says that repeated good choices make time your friend, while repeated bad choices make time your enemy. He gets into the value of systems and why safeguard strategies are so important for helping us to prevent problems before they happen by automating and eliminating choices through a personal list of decision-making rules. The last part in this section is probably the most valuable though, as it's all about how to bounce back from wrong decisions when you end up making a mistake, because we're all going to make wrong decisions and we will all make mistakes. What's important is not what happens, but what you do with what happens, where you go when you actually make that mistake. The fourth section is about the mechanics of the decision-making process, and it includes a simple framework where we first define the problem, then we explore the possible solutions, then we evaluate our options, then we make the decision, and finally we execute the best option. Now it sounds pretty straightforward just hearing it, but seeing the visuals helps solidify these steps in your mind. And then the chapters in this section dive deeper into these steps and offer several frameworks to maximize the chance of success at each step. But the one thing that really stands out to me the most from this section is this quote from page 169 in the Evaluating the Options chapter, where Shane says, "Removing what doesn't serve our interests is what makes a map useful." Now this fits nicely with the whole map is not the territory idea that I talked about in another video, and it highlights the importance of deciding what information is useful for ourselves. The fifth section is where we start to get philosophical, and Shane talks about wanting what matters. This section is all about finding meaning and joy, which aligns with the framework that I teach in my life theme cohort that helps create motivation to do the things that matter and clarity to cut the things that don't. Now in the cohort, we do this by identifying a personal mission statement and then personal core values that we can use to measure our decisions against. So obviously, I really enjoyed this section. There's also a chapter here devoted to the idea of memento mori, which I explain in another video and also show how to create a widget for measuring this using DataView in Obsidian if you're interested in that. The conclusion is short but effective and reiterates the importance of good decision making. I like how this book ends by admonishing us to avoid default decision-making and decide for ourselves what we want out of life. It's a great way to summarize the book, and it gives a clear path forward by challenging us to start taking action immediately. Now, if you can't tell already, I absolutely love this book. It's an easy 5 stars in my opinion. It's one of the best books that I've ever read. And while there are a lot of books about decision-making, this one is easily the best of the bunch. It's very well written, it contains some really powerful ideas, but it's still easy to read and approachable. I highly recommend everyone pick this one up, but don't just crank through it. Spend some time marinating on the ideas if you really want to extract maximum value from this book. Because I believe this book has the power to be transformational if you take the time to wrestle with it. So I don't recommend you listen to this one. Pick up the physical book if you can, and take your time to digest it as you go through it. I really believe this is a life-changing book, and it deserves a spot in every personal library. Speaking of extracting value from books, I've got a little bit of a different way that I take notes on books that I read, which helps me do just that. Now, if you want to learn more about my process, check out this other video where I walk through the whole thing step by step. The end result is a mind map that looks something like this, and I literally have hundreds of these in my collection and in my Obsidian vault. And if you want to download the mind map version of my notes for this book, you can do that for free using the link that is in the description below this video. You can also sign up for my newsletter, where I share these mind map files every week along with original articles on personal growth and PKM. The newsletter goes out every Monday, and you can sign up at practicalpkm.com. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in another video.